You left me hanging from a thread we once were from together. I licked my wounds but I can never see them getting better. Something's gonna change, things can stay the same. Her hair was pressed against her face, her eyes were on with anger, enraged by things unsaid and empty beds and bad behavior. Something's gonna change, it must be rearranged. I'm sorry, I did not mean to hurt my little girl. Let's be honest, I can't carry the weight of a heavy world. So good night, 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 good night. Hope that things work out alright. The room was silent as we all tried so hard to remember the way it feels to be alive, the day that he first met her. Something's gonna change, things can stay the same. You make me think of someone wonderful, but I can't place her. I wake up every morning wishing one more time to face her. Something's gonna change, it must be rearranged. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not mean to hurt my little girl. Let's be honest, I can't carry the weight of a heavy world. Good night, 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 good night. Hope that things work out alright. Sorry, I didn't mean to hurt my little girl. Let's be honest, I cannot carry the weight of a heavy world. So good night, 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 good night.